Hey, brothers and sisters from the StarkNet ecosystem. Welcome back to the Stark Cafe. This is Nurstar speaking, your personal Stark barista. And once again, we are ready to delight you with some very special StarkNet content. So, dear friends, let's start with this new session at the Stark Cafe, which is going to be very on-chain gaming focused, as we host Tarrence, one of the most active and talented StarkNet builders in this field and beyond. In fact, he's been working very hard on several fronts. He's been developing Cartridge, a StarkNet web console for games built on StarkNet, and at the same time, he's building the Dope Wars game, and is also a member of the Autonomous Anonymous Collective, which is contributing to create disruptive gaming concepts, such as the Dojo Toolchain for gaming and the Katana sequencer. And these two tools that I've just mentioned are going to be the core of our discussions for the Star Cafe of the day. So enough said for the intro. Let's welcome our guest, Tarrence. Hello, sir. Welcome to the Star Cafe, and thanks a lot for coming. How are you?
Hey, Nurstar. Thanks a lot for the introduction. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, what a pleasure to have you here, Tarrence. And I'm so excited about this session about on-chain gaming infrastructure on StarkNet. And so let's start with an icebreaker about you, Tarrence. Could you briefly guide us through your interesting background? I mean, feel free to say some introductory words on your projects like Cartridge and the Dope Words as well. And yeah, the word is yours.
Definitely. Yeah, so my journey kind of into the space started about 2 years ago when we created the Dope Wars ecosystem. And Dope Wars initially was launched as just like an NFT project, like very similar in ethos to Loot, but based having more the content was more around like street culture, like more like GTA versus like Wizards and Magic and stuff like that. And so we created this NFT about 2 years ago, and as part of that, we created a DAO where all secondary market sales, 5% royalty from secondary market sales went to the DAO, and the token holders could vote on how that capital was allocated. And a few weeks into the formation of the DAO, someone came to the DAO and proposed like building a fully on-chain game, recreation of like the classic Drug Wars game on top of StarkNet, which the DAO like funded. And so that was like kind of almost 2 years ago now. It was one of the first like fully on-chain games that was being built out in the StarkNet ecosystem very early on, obviously. And this kind of effort opened my eyes to this idea of fully on-chain games and the different like the exciting new properties it enabled for games and the power of StarkNet to kind of make this a reality. So ever since then, I've been focused on building fully on-chain games and autonomous worlds on top of StarkNet. We founded Cartridge about a year ago, which in Cartridge is an infrastructure provider for on-chain games and autonomous worlds. And as part of the Cartridge mission to like kind of accelerate the advent of this new medium, we've been investing a lot of time on different parts of the stack, just making it much easier for people to build these types of applications on top of StarkNet. So part of that effort has been around like the player side of things, of like how do players actually onboard and interact with games. And more recently, this past year, we spent a lot of time on Dojo, and Dojo is a toolchain for building on-chain games on top of StarkNet that makes it like significantly easier to spin these types of games up. We have a few different games in the ecosystem that are working with us, or Dojo is a community-driven project, and we have a few different games that are building an ecosystem, contributing to the creation of Dojo, and like kind of providing the common tooling and infrastructure that is necessary so that we can all like accelerate the development process and don't have to do all these things ourselves.
Very good, Tarrence. What a very interesting background. And, I just wanted to ask you, was the currency, the token related to the DOP NFTs community paper, right? Because I remember that. Am I correct?
Yeah, so there, like the paper, so when the Dope Wars ecosystem was spawned, there was like an effort that was actually driven by the community to issue a fungible token for the ecosystem. And this is the paper token that was like subsequently, I think like a couple days later, the community like put together a proposal to like airdrop it to all the holders of the dope NFTs tokens, and like basically paper was created, and distributed to all the participants in the ecosystem.
I see. Very good. Yeah, because I remember the time, this was this kind of, hustle and vibe around the paper and the dope NFT. And yeah, so I just wanted to ask you for that. I don't remember if it was like before the loot, concept craze or after.
So the original Dope Wars NFT was like a derivative of the loot idea. So it's the same, used a lot of the same shared like smart contracts. It was fundamentally a very similar idea of just like seeding this universe with like the simplest representation of it, which was these NFTs with cards, NFTs with the different items on them. So you had like weapons and shoes and chains and stuff like that. It was just like very low fidelity seeding of the universe, and then like a lot of stuff was built on top of that. So this came, I would say, I think maybe it was like a couple weeks or a couple months after Loot. I forget when exactly like Loot, the Loot project started, but it was definitely like inspired heavily by Loot.
Very good. Yeah, I remember those times. They were very exciting.
Definitely.
And anyway, let's dive a bit deeper into the topic of today. And Tarrence, for longer than a year, we've been hearing a lot about the great potential of on-chain gaming on Starknet.
Mm-hmm.
And you've been one of the most active proponents of it. And so I wanted to ask you, what do the concepts of on-chain gaming and the autonomous worlds mean to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, it's a very new idea and is definitely something that is kind of being defined as we go along. I think like on-chain games are basically like games where significant amounts of the logic of the game itself, like the rules that enforce, like for example, like the game loop, live on chain. So, in contrast to what a lot of people call like Web 2.5 games, where there's just like a traditional game, and the assets live on chain, and the assets derive their value from like some off-chain implementation of a game, like some promise that some game developer or game publisher makes to the player base, that their NFTs are going to represent like useful things inside of the game. But there's no like direct there's kind of like an oracle problem, right? Like the NFTs on chain don't derive their value directly from something else that lives on chain. It derives its value from something that's off chain, and it's permissioned and centrally controlled. So, as an example, even though you have an NFT that inherits the properties of the blockchain and can live forever and stuff like that, there's no guarantee that it will continue to be like a useful item in the game, or that it would even continue to be a part of the game. So in contrast to that, like on-chain games move that logic onto, like, as the name suggests, like onto the blockchain. So you have not just the assets living on chain, but you also have the logic for the game that makes these assets valuable and useful living on chain as well. So there's like a much more inherent like value to the things that exist inside of the ecosystem, and like the rules aren't like subject to change uh, according to like some off-chain actor or some like centralized party. Like it can be constructed in a way like where the rules could, like for example, be completely immutable, or they could be governed by a DAO, or you could potentially still have structures where you have an on-chain game and the rules of the universe, and probably it makes a lot of sense in the early days of games for this to be the case, can still be governed um, by like a small development team or something like that, and then over time progressively decentralized. But like these properties of being able to derive the value of things in the ecosystem and have the guarantees of the blockchain around the logic of the game itself is what the fully on-chain game I think refers to. Um, Autonomous worlds is like an extension of this in a sense. Like autonomous worlds are basically this idea of these like permissionlessly expansible universes, where, like for example, a lot of different games can exist in the ecosystem around like some shared lore or some like shared like set of universal constraints, like, like the physics of the digital world. So I think like autonomous worlds uh, have like a much more, at the lowest level, have a much more primitive representation. So, like similar to, in the real world, you have like, these basic constituent parts of the physical reality that are composed together to create like the more complex things that we experience. So you have like the fundamental primitives like atoms and elements and stuff like that, and physics, like the laws of physics. And I think like autonomous worlds is basically the idea of recreating this like fundamental set of rules on chain that's, that a lot of new interesting experiences can be built on top of.
Very well, Tarrence. Yeah, I think there's a great potential behind the autonomous worlds and the on-chain gaming. I wonder a bit how state regulations will be applied to this kind of autonomous worlds and games that are owned by DAOs. But obviously, there's not a correct question to these questions because sorry, there's no correct answer to these questions because I mean the regulatory environment is still very gray. But do you have any thought about that? How do you think? I mean, will states have to adapt sooner or later, to these kind of new realities that are coming out?
It's a good question. Like where we're kind of experimenting is a little bit detached from like the hyper financialization component of the blockchain space, and I think there is like obviously an interesting interaction between them. But I think a lot of those questions will kind of be answered by the DeFi space before it's necessary to think about them in the on-chain gaming space, just because like there's the DeFi space is so much more mature and so much further along on kind of this like path of interfacing with the real world and figuring out like um, how that happens. But there is for sure like a lot of interesting questions that are opened up around like securities laws, and I don't know how like they could potentially apply to like on-chain games. I mean it's like quite ambiguous. I think like in my opinion, um, even like the mechanisms that traditional games have today, it seems like if you just put them on the blockchain, like people would consider like the same exact thing. In some cases, people will consider them like now subject to like regulatory compliance, which maybe they weren't previously, or like it was just like people didn't expect that these regulations would apply to like something like games, which are kind of just for fun. So I don't know exactly how it'll all play out, but it's definitely an interesting space that is important to everyone building in the blockchain space, especially us. Our team is primarily located in the United States, so there's obviously quite a bit of movement on this side of things right now. But I don't really have personal thoughts, at least that are particularly interesting or coming from like I don't have this. This is not my core expertise, so I kind of just defer to the other experts in the space.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's see how things will unfold in the future. Anyway, I would like to take advantage of a small break to thank some of the live listeners that are here with us today. We see our friend Crypto Gurka, then ClickSave, Kodawari, Mart, Ametel, who's also, let's say, a gaming builder on Starknet. He builds a Starknet version of the game, which is called No Game. And yeah, having said that, let's get deeper into Dojo right now. And Tarrence, you already told us that Dojo is a tool chain for gaming. Maybe you could explain to us what a tool chain is, and also, how was Dojo born, and how does it work in practice?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, Dojo is a tool chain for building on-chain games. It's something that was started at the end of last year by Silverloaf and myself, and that we've been working on in kind of like coordination with like the Starknet ecosystem's upgrade to Cairo 1, which is kind of the regenesis event requires everyone to rewrite their contracts in Cairo 1. So it's been a great opportunity to take a lot of the learnings that we had from building games on top of Starknet and during the Cairo 0 kind of era, and now applying those and building this together. The toolchain itself is basically, it consists of a few different pieces. One of them is like the on-chain representation of the game, which uses an entity component system. So it standardizes the way that you represent chains, you represent games on chain, which allows like a lot of powerful, like once you have this like this canonical representation of on-chain games, you can start to build like interesting infrastructure on top of it, similar to how ERC20 enables that for fungible tokens, or 721 for non-fungibles, for example. So we have like the on-chain representation with the ECS. We provide like a Cairo 1 plugin that makes it very easy to define the components in the systems of a world. So components, ECS system is something that goes back like quite a while in the game development space, and is a well-adopted architecture for building games, like even outside of the blockchain space. It consists of components, which is the state of the world, and systems, which are like the state transition. So like basically implement the logic of the game. And so Dojo provides the Cairo 1 plugin that makes it very easy to describe these. And then we provide the toolchain for easily deploying and migrating a world. So you can go, we have a command line interface called Sozu, which will build a world and then figure out like a migration strategy for deploying it on chain. So as you deploy a world, you need to declare the world, you need to install the components and the systems when you initialize it or spawn it. And then over time, you have to, as the world expands, like through this permissionless expansion mechanism, and people contribute different pieces to it, the Soju helps like reconcile like different conflicts or permissions errors, issues, and allows you to like get this property of permissionless expansion of the on-chain universe. We also provide some other things like Katana. Katana is a development sequencer for rapid development of Dojo games. So it's taking advantage of a lot of the new advances in the Starknet ecosystem around like the new Cairo VM implemented in Rust. It's super fast and allows you just like to have a much tighter development feedback loop of like writing some code, deploying it, and testing it inside of your game. And then we provide something called Tori, and Tori is a verifiable indexer. So basically what Tori does is it provides a great interface for the client to interface with the on-chain data and logic of the game. So it creates like what's called like reactive bindings between the world state and the local client state. So as soon as something changes on the blockchain, it's immediately reflected on the client. And we generate like a nice, easy to use GraphQL interface for people interacting with it. So those are the different pieces that we have today of the Dojo toolchain. And then like some of the interesting, exciting spaces that we're pushing into now is around client-side proving and introducing private information, like kind of fog of war mechanics, and making those easy and accessible to developers building these types of games.
Very well, Tarrence. And I also believe that by being a toolchain, Dojo has also a very important educational purpose for the ecosystem, because it will be helping also those gaming developers who are not very familiar with Cairo. And I also suppose that there's a lot of resources that can be accessed through GitHub, for example. So would you tell us how would a developer, what a developer should do in order to, to get familiar with Dojo and maybe also contributing to Dojo? What's the process for doing that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Dojo is a community-driven project, so we have a lot of contributors already. I think it's like almost 30 people, and a bunch of different games have, a lot of like interesting experimental games have been starting to be built with Dojo. The best way to get involved is probably to just follow from the Twitter account, the Dojo Starknet Twitter account. You can find the Discord, hop in the Discord. There's also, if you go to dojoengine.org, is the landing page that'll give you a script of how to install the full toolchain, and you can find the GitHub there. And then we have a book that is in active development. Actually, we need to like surface it a little bit better, but at book.dojoengine.org that describes a lot of the different components of the toolchain and some of the different like the Dojo ECS, for example, that you leverage when building games on top of Dojo. So I think probably the simplest the entry point into the ecosystem is just to follow us on Twitter and join the Discord, and then if you have any questions or anything, just like reach out and someone will be there to help.
Very good to know. And some weeks ago you announced Katana, and you've already spoken about it, what it is, and it's a Rust written sequencer for gaming development on Starknet. And maybe would you like to say some more words on the role that Katana will play on the Dojo stack?
Mm-hmm.
And also I would like to know what is the the difference between Madara and Katana, because they're both sequencers that are written in Cairo.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe somebody could get confused, So could you clarify that, please?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of similarities between Katana and Madara. They both they use, so in the Starknet ecosystem, there's been there's the Cairo RS, which is the Cairo VM, which both of the sequencers share, and then there's the introduction of the Starknet operating system on top of that. And Starkware is maintaining one called the Blockifier that both Katana and Madara are using right now. And then we both wrapped in an RPC. The difference is Katana is much simpler and is not focused on being a fully decentralized sequencer. So Madara basically is based on the substrate, the framework, which is from what you call it, Polkadot, from the Polkadot ecosystem. So they built out a node architecture called Substrate, and Madara basically replaces their runtime with the Cairo VM runtime. And the nice thing about that is you get something that's very robust, very production ready, and has for example consensus algorithms built in, and is ready for spinning up a decentralized sequencing set and things like that. So Madara is great for that kind of use case. It's a little bit slower to iterate or to experiment with because it has all this additional complexity and these additional constraints. And so Katana, we spun up Katana, and it took us about a week to get it into a place where we could use it for development. The beauty of it is it's so simple. It doesn't introduce all this overhead of decentralization and consensus algorithms and peer-to-peer networking and stuff like that. And I think for games, early on in the development, that's perfectly fine. I think there's a role for both Madara and Katana. And I think the kind of the natural progression of people building these types of applications will be initially to relax the requirements on, decentralization, and potentially just run something much simpler like Katana and just develop something that people want to use. And then over time, because Madara and Katana are compatible with each other, you can start to, as the ecosystem requires it, migrate to something a little bit more robust like Madara, a little bit more complicated to maintain, but that allows you to have features like decentralized consensus. I think in general for games, on-chain games, basically by having a centralized sequencer, you basically relax the requirements around censorship resistance. That's really what you get in a roll-up kind of decentralized sequencing. Just gives you this ability to have censorship resistance. But for games, I think high throughput and low latency is more important. And anytime you want to introduce decentralization, you obviously have to increase the latency. You have to give time for all the nodes in the network to chat with each other, right? You have to take that into account. So I think in a lot of applications, Katana will probably suffice. And I think the simple kind of architecture of Katana makes it a great candidate for experimenting with more novel gaming specific rollups that have potentially different state representations or, ticking chains and stuff like this. You can very easily modify the Katana node to support these more exotic kind of gaming specific rollups, which I think is going to be an interesting space for exploration in the future as well.
Amazing journey through the Katana sequencer, and you also explained in a very good way what's the difference between the Madara and the Katana sequencers. And so I suppose that Katana is the best choice also to experiment at such an early stage. Also of the Starknet scaling solution as well. And as we having said that, as we're coming closer to the end of this Star Cafe session, I would like to thank all the live listeners who are here with us. And obviously, if you would like to ask Tarrence for some questions at the end of the session, feel free to send me a request to speak, and I'll be glad to send it to you. And having said that, let's finish with the last questions on my side. And Tarrence, the Dojo gaming engine is also one of the categories that are being experimented with at the ongoing hackathon by Pragma, by the Pragma Oracle, and which is also, this hackathon is the first hackathon for Cairo 1.0. And could you tell us more about the challenges featuring Dojo, what it consists of?
Yeah, I think the Pragma Hackathon just wrapped up. I forget exactly what the specific bounties were for. I think there was like we did a set of bounties for Dojo, for Cartridge, and for Realms, and I think Brick maybe did some as well. I forget exactly um, what they were. I know there was a few teams building on top of Dojo, which is like super exciting to see. Is very early on in the development of the Dojo, and we're just getting to the point where we're close to like a stable release. The ecosystem at large is changing quite significantly and rapidly improving the last few months. So really appreciate like the people willing to kind of to deal with a lot of the edge cases and the complexities of building with Dojo. Yeah, I don't remember exactly what the bounties were, but I think there was a few exciting projects. I'm going to have some time today to take a look at them, which is, yeah, it's going to be super cool.
Yeah, very well, cool. I'm also looking forward to to knowing the winners of the hackathon. They should be announced shortly, and you're also one of the judges, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. So I'm planning to take a look at those. I think the deadline for judging is like this weekend, and so I think it will be announced maybe early next week.
Great, looking forward to it. And speaking about hackathons, Dojo is also going to be the supported game engine for the on-chain category of the hacking Lambda ZK week around, which is a kind of hackathon week, 1 week long hackathon, let's say, around ZK Tech, organized by Lambda class in Paris during the HCC week. So give us a brief Taylor on what we could be seeing coming out of such a promising event in terms of on-chain gaming and autonomous worlds.
Yeah, the ZK Week hackathon I think is going to be super interesting. I think the talent that the Lambda class team has managed to put together is really like exceptional. I think we have like a set of ideas for people to hack on during the hackathon. I think potentially, based on the kind of the makeup of like the skill set of the people participating, we might see some interesting stuff on the zero knowledge side around like private information in games. I think that would be really cool. I know like the Lambda class guys are they have the open source Cairo prover, which I think will be pretty much ready for like some simple use cases and experimentation during the hackathon. So I'm personally hoping to see some experimentation around incorporating, private information, client-side proving, these kind of capabilities into the Dojo stack.
Yeah, can't wait to see what will come out of it. And having said that, it's time to receive some questions from the audience. And I know that our friend Crypto Gurka has some questions for you, Tarrence. So hey, Gurka, how are you? The floor is yours.
Hello. Hi, Tarrence.
Hey,
It was a great space. I've got one question. I was recently looking at a lot of GTA streams and trailers because GTA is coming out. So I had a thought about like on-chain in-game physics. Is it like a necessity to make this kind of gaming physics on-chain, for example, the wind or, like movement around, grasses, for example, or the trees or something like that? Is it a necessity? Will it even happen? And the second question would be, when will it be the time where we will utilize this kind of on-chain game physics, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I think like it depends on the type of game. I mean, obviously, Grand Theft Auto in its current form is like an incredibly ambitious game, and like a full like 3D simulation of like an entire city, and isn't feasible to put on chain today. I think the earlier versions of GTA, like I don't remember which one it was, like GTA 2 or whatever, where it was like top down. Those ones are for sure much more feasible to exist as fully on-chain games today, and might be interesting. But even in in the current state of things, I don't know. It's a good question, and I don't know if it'll necessarily ever make sense for like bullets or something to be tracked on chain. You might want to use like verifiable compute to like kind of have. Eventually, it might be possible to have like the full kind of, even in a 3D shooter game. I mean, it's not today, but eventually it might be to have like that, those like that logic of the game verifiable, and then checkpointed onto chain with like a recursive proof. It would be quite easy to put that compute on chain. It would just be quite expensive, and take a while to prove it today. And then I think like the even on the point of like the like wind or the grass and stuff like that, I think the pieces that are interesting to put on chain and to have this like computational integrity property are probably the pieces of logic of a game that play an important role in the outcome of the game. So if you have things for just like purely aesthetic reasons, like like visually pleasing like grass that sways in the wind, but it doesn't actually have an impact or like isn't something that potentially gives someone an edge in the game, then it's probably never like necessary to introduce like the additional overhead of proving it and putting it on chain. And you should like probably focus more on just like the core game mechanics being on chain. So, rendering, for example, like if you're building a game that's 3D rendered, you're never going to do the actual rendering on chain. It's just not feasible, or like not even necessarily on chain, but like with verifiable compute, it just doesn't make sense. But that the actual things that the user is interacting with potentially makes a lot of sense to be on chain. I don't know if does that make sense.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Appreciate it. That should be it from my side.
Thank you very much, Gurka, for your brilliant question. And so, guys, we're coming to the end of this Star Cafe session. And I would like also to say thank you to all the live listeners, to Gurka. We also have Silv from Brick NFT. He's also playing a very important role on the blockchain, on the on-chain gaming field on Starknet. And there's also Raphael from Giza, and it will also be interesting the intersection between AI and on-chain gaming, but obviously it will need a session of its own to talk about that. And then thank you to Exodus, ClickSave, Out Something, who's also organizing a DAX meetup for the DAX Everywhere holders in Paris on the 20th. So the day before Starknet CC. Then shout out to Kodawari, Nikabar, Casey, Uncommon, and Hisa. And obviously a huge thank you goes to Tarrence for taking some of his precious time to be with us at the Star Cafe. Thank you, Tarrence. I hope you had a great time. And looking forward to seeing you again at the cafe.
Definitely. Thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone attending and listening in.
Awesome. So guys, it's time to close. Remember to share the Starknet vibe, and see you next time. Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.